Every civilization sees itself as the centre of the world and writes its history as the central drama of human history. The words of Samuel Huntington in The Clash of Civilisations. And it's precisely our poor understanding or lack of will to understand others' cultures that the world is as polarised as ever. The ideal of living as part of a global village is slowly fading away, allowing the rise of nationalism. So can we improve relations and cooperation among nations and peoples across societies, cultures and religions? Or is the clash of civilisations inevitable? We will explore more as the UN High Representative for the Alliance of Civilisations, Miguel Angel Moratinos, talks to Al Jazeera. Miguel Angel Moratinos, thank you so much for speaking to Al Jazeera.
Well, thank you very much to invite me for this conversation.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation because the world is at such a critical inflection point. Everything from the rise of China to global inequality, increasing protest, what some see as the erosion of democracy. And I'm drawn to a word that you use a lot, and that's the word fraternity. What is it about fraternity that so appeals to you?
Well, before I got to this word fraternity, that is a key word, I think, in today's international relation, let's just try to give to the public opinion the sense that we are in a transitional phase. Every time when we move from the old world to the new world, this contradiction period. Where
and you see this now as a contradictory transition period?
Absolutely. I mean, we all know. And politicians know, head of state know, politologue, analysts, we all know that we are living in 21st century. It's no more the 20th century. But unfortunately, we are trying to continue to work with the same instrument, the same methodology of the old century, not the new one.
What do you mean by that? There is rapid change, we know. There's rapid technological change. We live in a much more globalised world. And the rise of China is reshaping the geopolitical landscape. So what is it about the 20th century that's not working now?
Well, it's not working because the multiplicity of factors. Of course, we have governments, nation state, but there are the private sector, there are the civil society, there are the strong impact of media, of course, of internet, of the new technology. So these are different actors. There is also new, let's say, focus of power or influence, like you mentioned, China, the new emergent countries. And at the same time, people, citizens, started to think that they can decide by their own. The traditional representative democratic system is, not really replying and responding to the needs of the people. So altogether, everybody knows that we have to change, we have to adapt ourselves, but the point that we are missing is that how we are going to engage this new process of establishing a new world order.
And that's where you come to this word fraternity, the ability of people to live together and to have fraternal relationships, to see that we are part of a shared community.
Absolutely. I mean, that's fraternity, humanity. There are two words that we are using in our organization and that encapsulate the sense that without the human factor, without taking into account what the human intelligence, not the artificial intelligence, can provide to the society, we will go in a, I will say, very complicated area. So the problem today is that we all agree, and we are now moving forward to save the planet. And we all agree, and it's not only Greta. I mean, everybody practically.
Well, not everyone agrees.
Well,
I mean, you're talking about climate change.
there are a lot of people who are sceptical. There are people who don't necessarily want to sign on to the measures that are needed. And President Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Accords because he doesn't agree with the direction the world's going in.
There are, there's some cases, and at the end they will agree. But the awareness at the global scale is in favor that we have to make a new pact with the nature. But that's very good. I'm the one to support that. But the day after, let's imagine that we save the planet, that we wake up in the morning.
We have to live together.
Yeah, we have to live together. And then we need fraternity.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, fundamentally it says this: all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. It's a lovely sentiment, but if you look around the world right now, would you say that that, in fact, is true?
No, it's not true. We have a long way to go. And this is a perverse dialectic today with two concepts that you mentioned at the introductory remark. One is inequality, and another is identity. And you can see how these two words influence each other. What we have populism rise in Europe and certain Western countries because people have difficulties in jobs, in job creation, in the way they have their own prosperity. At the same time, they say, well, it's because we have immigrants. It's because we have the others coming to us. So let's go to be together ourselves, our identity, rest to reform identity without the others, and then maybe we'll have better equality. But that is wrong. The way to follow in the future is to try to, well, of course, combat inequality, at the same time having an, I would say, inclusive identity. I mean, identity is not bad. I mean, I'm from Madrid, I'm a Spaniard, I'm European, I'm Mediterranean, I'm from the international relations for the world. But I accumulate these identities. The question when your identity is the only one and you exclude the other.
I'm really interested that you've raised the word identity, because I think identity right now is the critical issue in our world. Whether it's China, where they talk about the rise of China and the importance of China, and Xi Jinping continuously telling the Chinese people, never forget the 100 years of humiliation by foreign powers. Whether it's Russia with Vladimir Putin, who looks at the 20th century and laments the end of the Soviet Empire as the great catastrophe of the 20th century. Whether it's Hungary with Viktor Orban and bringing up that sense of Hungarian identity. Everywhere you can see this, and you can see the attraction of people to this. Do you see this rising nationalism and the identity of nationalism as being the big challenge to the order that you're talking about?
Absolutely. I mean, nationalism is a cancer. I don't like nationalism. In the 21st century, you have really to overcome. I mean, we are one humanity. We are working for equal citizenship in the world. And so any kind of nationalistic view, approach is wrong, because sooner or later they need to have a collective approach in order to solve the challenge of today.
But increasingly people are turning away from this.
It's true what you say, that some countries, some actors in the international community today, they are using this identity, let's say, presentation in order to defend their right, their interest, their influence. But sooner or later, I think the rise of this citizenship that want to really be at the equal footing in all the main questions that affect ourselves, we will prevail. I mean, it's not easy. We're at the beginning. This kind of thing can be solved easily. Unfortunately, we are already in 2020, practically 2 decades. Let's not repeat what happened in the 20th century. In the 20th century, we have, unfortunately, 2 world wars, and only in 1945, or practically the half of the century, they decided, oh, let's go to create the United Nations and the Charter of San Francisco. But it took us 2 world wars and the decision to put some order. So extract some lesson ourselves and try to adapt our work. And we have already missed 2 decades, 20 years has already passed, and we are still fighting, trying to see how we are going to organize ourselves, how we are going to respond to this new challenge.
Well, many people say that we're seeing the end of just this order you're talking about, what's broadly known as the global liberal order, helmed by the United States, built around organisations such as the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank, all of these multilateral institutions. But at the same time, are we seeing the limits of that? There must be something in the failure of cosmopolitanism and globalism that draws people back to their own identity, to say, being Hungarian, being British, being American, being Chinese, that matters. And it matters more than being a global citizen. Do you think that we've reached the limits necessarily of that cosmopolitanism, globalism, and it's not speaking to something that people feel very deeply, a sense of belonging and purpose and national identity that so many other leaders are now tapping into?
I think that's because people don't understand or don't want to really adapt to the complexity. That's another key word in today's reality, the complexity of our reality. Of course, before you are global or you are national. You have an identity and you have a Hungarian. Not today, not. You can be a good Hungarian and be proud to be Hungarian, or be a good Chinese and to be proud to be of an old civilization like Chinese civilization. But at the same time, in the 21st century, you have to be part of the world, of this so-called one humanity. So instead of saying, well, let's only behave in my capacity of a Hungarian, no. Sometimes you have to behave like a Hungarian, but sometimes you have to behave like a European, and sometimes you have to behave like a universal, member of the international community. So I don't like, civilization has been many. And we, the Western, we consider ourselves the top. If you go to Arnold Toynbee or the traditional history, and they say there was a, let's say, evolution, and the one who prevailed was the best.
Well,
no.
This was the end of history.
But
this is the Francis Fukuyama idea.
The Chinese are coming back,
yeah.
But they are taking some part of our Western civilization. I'm a Western. I don't consider I'm in decline. No. But I am aware that my world is not hegemonic anymore. So I have to share the way to construct the world in a certain equilibrium and respect of the other.
At some point, and you raise Western civilization, we talk about liberal democratic values which have underpinned this global liberal order. At some point, do you have to stand up for those values? Do those values mean that you have to draw lines in the sand? And I'm thinking here specifically about the rise of China, which has lifted more than 500 million people out of poverty, is the engine of global economic growth through its Belt and Road Initiative, is reaching out to the world. It is a global power on the verge of becoming a superpower to rival the United States. But it utterly, utterly rejects ideas of liberalism and liberal democracy. How do those two things coexist?
Well, universal values had been adopted as universal human rights declaration, and when it had been signed and adopted and fulfilled by the whole international community. We are not going to renounce to these values. And I will not renounce to my Western values, but I have to really to understand how the interpretation others about certain issues. And I think the problem that before the Western democratic liberal system considered there was the only one and the super one. And today we have to really adapt ourselves to the new reality. And we can learn from other civilizations, from other cultures, without renouncing my values. I feel and I fight, I will continue to strive for the Western values, but in the positive sense. But certain values or certain behavior of the Western liberal democracy has not been so much to be proud of, There has been some certain episode in the recent history, that didn't really make our Western to be so proud of ourselves. So we have really to be modest and trying to work together. And the others, the ones who are coming back or trying to come with different views, they have also to understand that it's not the end of the game. If we want to live together, that means that we have to share and to put these universal values adopted and accepted by everybody. It's not an easy task. It needs a political will. It needs that the people understand what is at stake, and then And of course, they have to be educated. They have not to be manipulated by others that try to bring them into the wrong direction. You know, that is the real challenge we are facing today.
At the same time as we see the rise of China, an authoritarian capitalist model, if I can use that phrase, that presents a real challenge to the global order that we've known. We're also seeing what some see as a democratic recession. Freedom House now counts 13 consecutive years of declining democracy, declining freedom around the world. Do you believe that democracy itself is under threat at its weakest at a very time when there is a rising authoritarian alternative, particularly with China?
Of course, democracy is a permanent exercise of the freedom of people to choose their future. But let me mention an anecdote or a comment from a Chinese politologist who told me, well, the difference between the traditional Western democratic system and our system is the following. You, in your system, you elect your people. You go through election and you elect your people. In our system, we select and then we elect. So the people who have been elected is because they have been selected first by the system. They have been addressing certain responsibility in the youth movement, in the council of certain cities, certain region, and then the Chinese Communist Party decide to elect them. So in our system, we have been during the last, let's say, century practically electing, without selecting the people who are going to be, you know, representing us. And what is happening today, that we have lost one of the main issues of democracy, that is participation. So we were supposed, we didn't care about politics, so you go every 4 years to deposit your ballot, and you elect some people you don't care. Today, no. Today, people in the Western country and everywhere, they say, no, I want to participate. Democracy is representation and participation. And during the last decades, we have been a super habit of electivity and a deficit of participatory systems. So now the people, and that's the reason we have to reform the democratic liberal system. We have to find a way how the people can participate much more.
What if that means that participation also comes with a fundamental rejection of the political system that currently exists? And let's use a concrete example, your own native Spain. It is proved so difficult to get a functioning government, election after election, because you have this existential crisis, this existential question of Catalan independence that Spain cannot resolve. If Catalan becomes independent, you're no longer Spain as we know it. So how do you resolve those tensions at the heart of democracy when you have people participating in that democracy who reject fundamentally the system itself and look for their own freedom?
People go to vote and they vote for one option. And I can assure you that 2 months later they say, they don't represent me. And that didn't happen before. So you'd say, well, you vote for me, let me do my policy. No. They say, no, I'm the one who decides. So there is a lack of participation, there is a sense of frustration from the people, and that's the reason they go to the street. And it's very, 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 very serious, because if you lose institution, and you let everybody express in a permanent manner your frustration, your desire, your rights, even sometimes they go to the street, the only way to really mobilize and to legitimize certain rights, okay, but at the same time, you don't canalize all that into certain institutions, we will have a lot of difficulties. But new technologies can provide certain participatory mechanism for expressing in a much more modern, functional manner the way to take part of this democratic system. Democracy has to be reinvented every day. And what we cannot say that as we are in a crisis, the Western liberal system, that other so-called democracy can give us lessons. No. We receive lessons from everybody, but no lesson from some countries that don't really fulfill the principle of democracy, that is freedom and justice, that have to be, well, adapted to certain law and certain mechanism.
One of the issues, and again, this comes back to this ideal of fraternity that you have for the world, is the issue of the movement of people. Open borders, particularly with Europe, and we've seen a backlash to that. I think Brexit is partially informed by that. A rejection of refugees, particularly in countries like Hungary, Poland. How do we live in a world where increasingly we have to share the same space, where we are increasingly asked to become more diverse and more pluralistic, and yet people have seem to have an emotional rejection of so much of that?
Well, it's a real problem, you know, because that's the reason one of the tasks of the Alliance for Civilization is to really work with the governments and societies in order to really demonstrate that you can live together. Sometimes it depends how you connect with the society, how you connect with the people, how you integrate in a positive manner this relationship, you create this fraternity. And the fraternity have to be taught in the school, have to be educated, have to be conducted by the political figure. If the political figure, instead of calling for fraternity, are calling for hate and for rejection, that you cannot make this happen, you know. So if you are in European Union, a country, and when there are the flood of refugees that are coming from a war, from a distress situation, and they say, well, I will receive only the ones who are Christian. Well, the European Union have certain laws. They have a Lisbon Treaty. I signed myself Lisbon Treaty, myself. And there is a word that is called solidarity, number 2, Article 2. So why the Commission and the other member states didn't take action? I mean, you cannot accept in today's world, in European spirit, that somebody said, no, I will only accept the one who have a cross. I'm Catholic myself, but it doesn't mean that I have not to be in the same behavior as others. So that's the lack of response, the political response to certain absolutely negative behavior also produce this kind of acrimony between the people.
I'm glad you've mentioned the question of religion, because I wanted to come to that finally. You've spoken a lot about this, and you've said that faith is essential to human liberty. Faith is essential to human liberty. And yet in this increasingly small, globalised world, we're being forced to live with each other. We are being forced to accept different faiths, and that's producing a backlash in some cases. Do you believe, as some have said, that faith itself is under attack in what is an increasingly secular world?
Absolutely. We have been, this year has been a very negative year, because the enemies of this world of fraternity and humanity, they have a well target what should be the goals in order to destabilize the whole, let's say, common behavior of respect and mutual acceptance. So before they used to target one religion, but now they decided to attack all, religious sites.
Well, we know there is Islamophobia on the rise,
anti-Semitism, Sri Lanka, synagogue, everybody.
Anti-Semitism on the rise,
Islamophobia. And I think that's important that, I mean, a state should be secular. I'm a socialist, so it has to be secular, but you cannot neglect, the fact that religiosity, the religious dimension is part of society. Politicians cannot ignore, and they have to address. And that's the reason the Alliance is working in order to really take it in a positive manner, in order that together religion can facilitate a better living among ourselves.
Miguel Angel Moratinos, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.